we're going to focus on these couple things, right? When you are in the session and your brain is a little uncomfortable because you're trying to learn something that's new or something that's difficult, you're in the session, and when you walk away from it, you can just maybe have a tendency to leave the session where it was, right? Just leave what you learned on the field. And I think it's incredibly important to actively recall what you just learned so that you don't forget it, right? There's statues all over the world because we're forgetful people. We forget what happened before us. We forget about our history. We have certain holidays so that we don't forget the contributions that a person or people have made, right? So as we know we're forgetful people, if we can find some different ways to actively recall what we learned, we have a better chance of being able to focus on that thing or remember that thing or implement that thing or just bring to our awareness what it is that we're working on. So what could active recall look like? It could look like you get in the car and you're like, hey, mom, dad, this is what I learned today, and I want to teach you about it. I want to teach you about set shape and how that might change. I want to teach you about how to be aggressive in 1v1 situations. And it's not for your parents. It's just for you to be able to teach someone else. Because when you teach something, you have to know it. And if you don't know it, you can ask some more questions. But actively recall, like on the way home, take 5 minutes, teach your parents about set shape. When you're done training, there's a goalkeeper that comes here, Sarah Perlis. Every time she's done her training session, she writes down some notes in her notebook. And yes, it does take a little bit more time, maybe a couple minutes. But next time she comes in, she always knows what she worked on and how it went. And she has some kind of idea of like, well, I want to continue to work on this and I need some more support with it. Or, hey, I'm going home to my training session and I learned this at TKI last week and I want to try it. And she gives her coach maybe a little insight on what she's exploring and working on, which I think is phenomenal. But maybe you wait until, if you're training on TKI on a Monday, you on Thursday look back in your notebook and just give it a little like leaf through and see what you've been working on to maybe actively recall that before your game on the weekend so you can continue to implement it there. So active recall is just going to lead to longer lasting learning. That was a tongue twister.
That was a tongue twister, but knowledge, baby. Let's go.
Yeah. That's probably something as a coach that you reflect back on a lot. Like, hey, I worked on, probably in college soccer more because you're working with the same players every week. And like, do you do IDPs? Because that's like another way to do some recall.
Yeah, so we do IDPs, and field players will get it like every 2 weeks. They'll have new like little tidbits of feedback in their IDP, like maybe a sentence or two. Goalkeepers I work so closely with that they're getting like pretty personalized feedback every single day. So I reserve our IDP time for like different moments throughout the season, preseason, pregame, conference, and but I do film with them. And every time we do film, my ending question is, what did you hear me say as the takeaways from this? And then that way I can write down what they said. And then if I need to clarify, I can clarify. Like maybe they really took a lot of feedback off what I said about protecting the area, but I also wanted them to hear the praise I gave them on in possession and how they were breaking lines. So it just gives me another opportunity to make sure, one, we're on the same page, but two, what are the things that are sticking out for them and how can I use that in my session planning moving forward?
Yeah, that's really good. And then for those of you who don't know what IDP is, it's just individual development plan. And that leads me to my third point is ask more questions. It's not like, hey, Tori, how can I improve? It's not that.
Yeah.
That's not really going to help you, like the random feedback here and there. Hey, Tori, I had a game this weekend and I was under pressure and I kicked the ball out of bounds. Can we talk through this? Can we work through this, right? Ask more questions. Reach out for more support. Hey, Coach Jill, I was feeling super nervous about this showcase that I had last weekend. And because I had so many nerves, I like hesitated in phase 1 outside the box and they dribbled it around me. Can you support me in this? Hey, Coach Leah, I have sometime this next season in my fall to implement some strength and conditioning. Can you help me, support me with my specific goals of becoming more explosive? Like, go to experts in your field or anybody. It doesn't even have to be an expert. Like sometimes, like whenever I worked in a team, I would ask the trainers, like, hey, can you come help me? And then I would ask them what their thoughts were after the training session, just because I wanted to hear a different perspective. Or I would ask the EQ person, hey, like, what did you see in that? Like, did you see certain body language? What did you hear? Like, how did you feel like within the session? Was it uncomfortable? Did you feel safe? Like, just ask questions, ask more questions, and be very deliberate and intentional and specific about what it is that you're looking for. Not just like, hey, how can I get better? No. Well, I want you to think about it. I want you to take ownership. I want you to be more curious about your own self. Sure, if someone offers you some feedback that you didn't ask for, okay, you can listen to it, you can hear it. But I just want you guys, I think there is so much value in taking ownership for your own game and just being able to explore edges of your own game and being curious about your own game. You're the only one playing it. You're the only one knows that what you want from your journey playing football and being in this wild position of goalkeeper that is so difficult. So you be very, very intentional about asking certain people certain questions and letting that not only you don't have to take every single piece of feedback that someone gives you and implement it and try it and own it. You don't, but you can let it be like a sieve and you can filter out what it is that you're like, yeah, I actually think I could do a little bit more of that. Or maybe I could try a little bit of that. Or maybe I tried that and that doesn't work for me because I'm not 6'2" and I can't set like that and I can't play that vertically high. But you will have more definitive answers. You'll have more definitive answers in the areas that you want more support, right? I had a conversation with a goalkeeper yesterday and she said, I went to this camp and they told me I need to change my set shape. And I was like, okay, that's like, I'm not sure I agree, but like, why? Why did they tell you to change your set shape? Because the only reason you would do that is because you're lacking something in one specific area that's your set shape is limiting you from getting, right? And set shape isn't about aesthetic. I don't really care how you set as long as it allows you to be the most mobile and cover as much goal as possible.
Yeah.
And I was like, that feedback might be good for you. Like you might need to change your set shape or you might not. But if you explore that feedback and filter out that feedback, you might have more certainty in the fact that your set shape is good or you need to adjust it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll have more clarity and we'll have more definitive answers if we sift through that feedback and explore it.
And you know what else is funny is like if someone asks me a question like what do I do to be better, I usually then answer back with a question until I get them asking a question that is actually like more rooted in purpose. So it's like it's so annoying, I think, to players. I'm gonna be real with you. They kind of look at me like, but like I'm not here to give you answers. I'm not here to like just spoon feed. We're here and we do what we want to do because we want to educate. You started this podcast talking about being an educator. And part of being an educator is helping them discover things on their own, actively recalling the things that they need support with.
Well, that's a great segue for us to shift gears. And so those were three things that as players you could instantly implement, like right now, this second, with no sweat equity involved, just more deliberate practice. So for coaches, want to do the same thing. And I actually think players could probably gain a little bit of perspective as well from this part of the podcast. So if you are a player and you're still curious, like stay tuned because I do think these three things could help you as well. But to your point, Tori, not spoon feeding people, I think it's really important as coaches that number one, we observe more and adapt more rather than talk more. So I want to, first of all, this is how we design our sessions, right? What is the problem? Okay. Establish what it is that you're trying to work on, whatever your intended outcome is. 2, design the session, design the constraint, design the method and the way that you're going to get that intended outcome to come to fruition. And then observe, how is it going? Is it working? Is it not working? Is the constraint I implemented working for this player? If not, based on your observations, you have to adapt. So number one, observe more and adapt more and talk less. So something that I have, this like hard and fast rule for myself, is that I do not give feedback in my first 1 to 3 reps. I don't. I let you explore. I let you try to figure it out and see if you're making any adjustments. And if not, I might stop it and I might adapt the constraint, or I might give like a little tidbit like, hey, put more attention on blah, blah, blah. Right. But I think we're so quick as coaches to just give answers, joystick, spoon feed, because we want someone to take and implement right away. And we want that person to feel good about changing, and we want them to feel good about like getting the answer and solving it. Right. But ultimately, we know that doesn't lead to long-term learning and robust problem solving. That just leads to cookie cutter answers that, hey, obviously you had pressure and that ball was bending away from you. You should have just parried it out into safety instead of trying to catch, right? So observing more in training what's going well, what's not going well, adapting it, and then trying to figure out, do they need a verbal intervention, or do they need an adaptation to the exercise? I think that's the art of coaching. But if we try to push ourselves to observe a little bit more and not just like tell the answers, I think it's going to lead to more effective sessions.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's like, when you think about our training, if you had to like severely minimize how you talked about it, like in a 10-second blip, that's a great way to break it down.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think for players too, like that would be so helpful. But I would probably say judge less, observe and adapt more.
Yeah.
That was bad. I was bad. I gave up a goal. That's judgment. Oh, wow. I was vertically way too low on the field. And that's why I could not impact outside the box. Okay.
Yeah.
I observed something. Hey, I got scored on because I was too deep. And then I can adapt. I'm going to wrestle and explore with my vertical positioning based on how deep my back line is, right? So judge less, observe, and adapt more for players.
Awesome.
Okay. All right. Today I'm joined with Dr. Heather Taggart, who, for our goalkeeping fans, may be aware of her long list of accolades, but I'm going to go through just a few of them. So hopefully I don't embarrass you off the start here, Dr. Taggart. But just for people who may be a little bit out of the loop, Dr. Taggart really came on the scene very strong. She was the 1988 Freshman Soccer Player of the Year. And we'll talk a little bit more about that run. And then it ended up being the not only two-time All-American goalkeeper first team for 1990 and 1991, but as well the ISAA Goalkeeper of the Year in 1991, which was a prestigious award at the time. Unfortunately, they folded it. But when you go back and look at those names as goalkeepers in there, you're in very good company. And then as well as the Big Ten Medal of Honor. And those are just a fraction of the accolades that Dr. Taggart won. So first off, thank you, Dr. Taggart, for joining us today. I'm very excited to kind of hear about your story with goalkeeping, and which I kind of laugh because as I was doing a little bit of research, it seems like goalkeeping was just a fraction for you as far as just even your time at Wisconsin and playing as well. So we're going to narrow in on a very specific spot, but it seems like you were really doing a lot as far as growing up with not only other sports, but it seems like you did some photography as well. So yeah. Tell me a little bit about this thread that kind of runs through you not only being an accomplished soccer player, but as far as everything you're doing, it seems like you were trying to get your hands on as much as possible, or maybe I'm connecting too many dots, but you fill me in a little bit on early days, what that was like for you.
Not a photographer. I'm not sure where that came in, but that's okay.
Oh, no, was it? Okay, I saw it. Oh, excuse me. There's pictures with your name was like listed as, so maybe there's another Taggart running.
So not sure where that came in. I would have loved to be because it's a pretty awesome field. But so for the most part, I went through, high school growing up. I was, a multi-sport athlete, basketball, volleyball, soccer, a little bit of softball. I gave that up kind of when soccer sort of started to take over, of course. But I think, growing up and we hear a lot about this banter back of multi-sport athletes versus the specialization that you hear nowadays. And back then there was just really not that much specialization nor opportunity to specialize that much. It was sort of the expectation you go from sport to sport to sport to sport to sport. And, in the end, at least as a goalkeeper, because back then, there weren't a lot of people training goalkeepers back then who had the experience or to have any idea how to train. So you really ended up using a lot of your own instincts and skills from a variety of sports. I'll give you an example. I think one of the things I've always seen as I've, coached goalkeepers over the years or watched goalkeepers play is, just how they get back to the bar, right? So high shots, how do you get back to the bar? And, for girls that didn't play a whole lot of like softball or baseball, I always thought it was really, really hard because like in baseball, at the crack of a bat, if you watch an outfielder, the first thing they do is they decide left shoulder, right shoulder, and they turn their shoulders and they take a step back in that direction in case the ball got crushed. And if it's short, then they attack and go forward. And with girls that didn't play a whole lot of softball or baseball, I'm not sure that was always like an ingrained sort of sense of what they're supposed to do. So that's one example of where playing a different sport, when you're like really learning on your own to some extent, and kind of testing your own waters of how do I get to balls that I normally shouldn't get to, that was helpful. I think, basketball, being a point guard, looking at angles, looking at passing angles, how to create space, and then how to take away space. All of those things in my mind really were the core things that helped me become a goalkeeper in the early years and to find success, just simply because, there wasn't a goalkeeper trainer, at practice every day.
Yeah. What was the first time you had what was the first time you remember, or first person you remember giving you any goalkeeping tips, advice that like you thought, hey, this actually helps? Because I imagine there was a big chunk of it where you're just figuring it out.
You were honestly figuring it out on your own. It was probably late in high school, to be honest with you, like really late in high school, probably at ODP when you do a few training sessions. Only had a couple hour training sessions with somebody, but they were giving, pretty quality advice. And then there was a guy who ran some camps around here named Don Klosterman. He coached at UNO for many years. UNO won a D2 championship, and then they went D1. But he also gave me some advice from time to time. There'd be a variety of coaches, but again, I think a lot of them were also relying on their like other sport knowledge and watching athletics as opposed to actually, playing goalkeeper.
Yeah. Well, I think for myself, I'm a little taller, so I'm 6'3". So when I'm working with a goalkeeper who's not 6'3", I feel like that's one of the things that coaches that come from the men's game maybe struggle to understand. Like, hey, and you mentioned all the footwork stuff. Like, that's a great example. Like for me, I could kind of clumsily back up and I could kind of deal with it because I was already tall enough. I didn't have to have the footwork. But for goalkeepers who maybe don't have that height, I think. Yeah. Men sometimes struggle with that. So I can see that being helpful on some of the stuff, but it seems like a lot of it was just kind of test by trial and fire and getting thrown in there
and understanding sports. Yeah. I mean, and I'm 5'5" to 5'6", so I had to, have actually exceptional footwork. That was probably the majority of what, all my focus on was, I naturally had quickness, right? That's not always, you can certainly train some of that, but then there's a whole sense of that that's just absolutely just a natural, and I was fortunate to have that. So once I, tailored quickness with a really distinct attention to optimizing footwork. I mean, and that's where like also, like volleyball comes into play, like when they're attacking the ball, their feet do the exact same thing every time. Yeah. And it becomes a really natural, so you don't even have to think of it. You train your approach, you train your footwork back to the bar, you train whatever. And so I, as I learned really quickly that I needed to incorporate those sorts of things if I was going to be successful at, 5'5", 5'6" with a pair of cleats on, maybe if I was lucky. But.
Yeah, no, that totally adds up. What when you were thinking of any time before college, when you were thinking of yourself as far as like, hey, I like not only playing goalkeeper, but I imagine in the other sports you were probably the player who didn't mind in volleyball diving maybe onto a table to save. You know, like it seems like you kind of had that ethos in you. What was, when you're looking back on that, what do you think was kind of that piece in you that really helped you find success in not only goalkeeping but all these other sports as well? Like what really translated to have that success there?
So, I mean, I think like clearly like just incredibly competitive, like that sort of competitive, intense attitude. You know, and people always say, you know, is it better to want to win or to not want to lose? And I hated to lose.
Yeah.
And I was pretty, you know, clear about, and I think all good athletes have some level of kind of, you know, egotism in terms of like, you know, I truly believed if they don't score on me, we never lose, which is a reality, right? But my goal every time was like, they are not going to score me. If they don't score me, my team never loses. It's that easy. And, you know, and then, you know, you play to that as your attitude.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about, as you're wrapping up high school, and you're starting to get contacted from, you know, I assume other schools. I guess I can only imagine what the recruiting process was like.
Yeah,
So
I'll give you my path to college. How about that? Yeah. So the path to college was, you know, clearly not a straight path. You know, I was from Omaha, Nebraska, and, you know, this was 85, 86, 87, leading up into college in 88. So, you know, there were teams going to regionals and things like that. But even in the Midwest, there weren't a lot of coaches coming to those tournaments and things like, because, you know, at the time, in terms of playing Division I soccer, there was Wisconsin, Michigan State, Colorado College, and then some of the kind of Ohio schools like Dayton, Wright State, you know, Cincinnati. That was kind of it for Division I soccer in the entire sort of upper Midwest. There was a lot of NAIA, like Lindenwood, some of the St. Louis places. So some of the bigger cities had some of that, but, you know, there wasn't a lot in terms of choices, of course. So my path to college was really through, in my mind, honestly, luck and circumstance, through ODP. So, you know, but also, you know, we would go, they've had a bunch of ODP. The Region 2 was in like Kenosha racing area at Park College there. And so you'd go up every summer and train and play games. But at the time, they also sort of like seeded the teams. So there was like an upper division, lower division. And, you know, pretty much all the coaches were watching sort of the upper division teams, which were the, you know, the Ohios, the Minnesotas, the, you know, St. Louis, the Missouris. Nebraska wasn't, you know, up there to say the least. So you could go in my first year or so there. I don't remember like even seeing a college coach. And then my second year up there, so it's probably summer of 86. The coach, they started doing a training for the goalkeepers. So at first they just played games and coaches watched, and then they started doing some training sessions and drawing players in and doing training sessions. So coach, I can't even remember his name, had the goalkeepers in for a training session. He was talking a little bit about a lot of kind of non-catching of balls. So pairing balls that he thought people should be catching from the games that he'd watched the day before, or kind of double catching where you kind of hit and then catch again. So he's talking a little bit about that. And I just literally happened to be standing right next to the goal post. And he's like, you know, he's making his point and he's like, hey, you get in the goal. You know, like he doesn't know my name. He doesn't know me from Adam, right? So I get in the goal, and I think his goal was to try to make a point about double catching or pairing or whatever. So he's volleying balls at me, and he is literally, and I'm competitive. So I'm catching as hard as I can get him. Like, is that all you got? Right.
Yeah.
And just, we get this game going, and he's just ripping, and I'm ripping it back at him. And so I'm throwing it back to him, and he's ripping at me, and I'm throwing it back to him. And he actually starts to like get tired because he's like hitting balls.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you see him kind of like stop and kind of like looked at everybody, and then he just pivoted to the next like conversation. And I was like, oh, okay. And then the next day there were coaches at our game, right? And it was really kind of, and then, soon after that, I started getting some contact from Wisconsin. I got some contact from, like I said, like some of the NAIAs in Missouri. Dang Biblovich and Colorado College came in late, and we're offering kind of really late. And then my interest actually was the Ivy Leagues, because I was a good student.
Yeah.
So, Princeton was, Princeton, Harvard, but mostly Princeton at the time. And then I had some contact with Stanford, but they weren't going to have any money for me. But I still applied to Stanford, and it's probably the only acceptance letter that I've ever kept was my acceptance letter to undergrad at Stanford.
Yeah.
But at the time, I was going to, have to pay a lot of money to go try to walk on at Stanford. And in the end, at Wisconsin, after, having met with, Greg and those guys, I ended up with a good academic and athletic scholarship that pretty much paid my way, which then made it a lot easier to go. And they were starting to become a much more competitive program at that point in time.
Yeah.
And then, my next summer was, I think, 87. So, going
to your senior year.
Yeah. So I'm going to go into my senior year of college, so senior year of high school. And that year I was still 16 at the time. And so I was still, able to be on the I think it was a U16 team versus a U18 or 19 team. Okay. And went to camp that summer. And at that point in time, I'd been in more contact, like at the camp, I'd met with Greg and chatted with him and Dino. And then they bumped me up to the U18 team. And so I'm literally in Kenosha, Wisconsin. There's no ATMs or debit cards back then, and nobody has cell phones. And the 16s were going straight home after the camp. So I'm there thinking I'm going to be there for the 5-6 days, and I'm going to turn around and go home. And instead I get bumped up to the 18 team. So then they were going to stay and train in Kenosha for 4 or 5 days, and then go up to national camp, which was my first kind of quote national camp. And that was up in Marquette, Michigan. So back in the day, a lot of those training camps were at these U.S. Olympic training centers. So they, interestingly enough, had one in Marquette, Michigan, and then they had one in Colorado Springs. So the following year was Colorado Springs. But so I go to national camp, and I'm 16, and it was a pretty interesting time. They first played their first kind of U.S. national team games in '85, and it's '87. So, and they didn't play a ton of games in '87, but that basically went to camp. So it was a combination of the 4 regional teams. So the U18, West, South, North, East, and then the other already college players that were already being evaluated on the national team thus far. And it was awesome. I mean, it was Christine Lilly and Mia Hamm's first national camp, Julie Foudy's first national camp. They roomed us with a person from a different region. So Heather McIntyre was who I was roomed with. She was from the West region. But yeah, it was crazy. So of course I didn't make the team, but then I had to drive the bus with them all the way back they went and played in Blaine, Minnesota. They had a really nice complex up there. And so we had to ride the bus back with them, and then they went and played soccer, and I got on a flight home. So, yeah.
I think the time, I think this is one of the most difficult things for people now to understand the lack of not only internet, but just communication. As that's all happening, and you mentioned being lucky, and I can definitely understand that, because that sort of feeling of all those things happening, you probably didn't have much of an understanding before they happened of these places are here. Okay. I'm here now.
Oh yeah.
Whereas now, is everything so public of, I this person's committed, or this is happening, or this is
Oh
happening.
yeah.
So
There was none of that. It was very, I mean, that week my parents had to like Western Union me $20 to get me through the next week. You know, it was the old days for sure. But pretty fascinating stuff. So that was a really exciting time. And then, you know,
well, let me pause you there, because before we get run away from it, to show this earlier, and I just thought it was a cool picture. So I did find this. I'm pretty ignorant on what all is going on here, but it's seemingly, and I'm sure you maybe remember this.
Yeah. So I was a sophomore.
Okay.
I was a point guard, and basically it was a district final, and it's better to be lucky than good, right? I banked in what would be a 3-pointer now, with just a couple seconds left. We had a really great shooter. We had a over 1,000-point scorer for high school on our team, and so of course they're marking her like crazy, and time's running out and someone's got to take the shot, so you take the shot, and it was pretty awesome. It was fun.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I just the picture, you're not in the picture, but I can imagine just like the moment. So I just wanted to share that. I thought that was great. Yeah.
And well, I don't know if you go back to that picture, 22 is a senior on the team.
Oh.
And she started and I came off the bench, but I was a good player, so I'd earned my minutes, and you can see how excited she is, despite the fact that she probably really, really wanted to be in the game at that point in time. But it's a pretty awesome team picture when you look at it, actually.
Yeah. No, that's cool. That's definitely a moment. I'm digging through some old newspaper stuff. Again, another of a different era. I'm trying to think the last time I actually have held a proper newspaper. It's been a while. But I'm very thankful for like the documentation of even not only just of records, but just of moments like that.
Yeah.
So very cool.
Very cool.
So jumping ahead to getting to Wisconsin, as you mentioned, your head coach is Greg Ryan, which I think is just kind of a funny connection. I think the soccer world's all pretty small at the end of the day, especially in these early years. You're also joining a team where, like you had said, they were on the rise, but hadn't quite had a big run yet. I think they played one national tournament before you had shown up, and so. Your freshman year, y'all make a Final Four appearance, and seemingly, I don't know if this is totally true, or maybe I'm connecting too many dots, but seemingly, if you have a good game against UNC, that just like puts you into another stratosphere. And so, I have a couple clips here as well, and just the quotes from Anson is really funny for me to hear, because you see a 3-0 loss, but at top right, I'm going to look at Heather Taggart long range, possibly as a national team goalkeeper, and this is just after your freshman year. So the Final Four appearance, you lose 3-0 to UNC. I guess I'm curious, as you're getting there, of your understanding, and we'll start small and go big, but just your understanding of yourself, of you probably have some confidence, you're competitive, but kind of seemingly pretty quickly you get put into this level of, hey, like she's not just good, like she's one of the best here. How did your understanding of your game and yourself kind of evolve just that freshman year?
Yeah, I mean, your freshman year, you're really, trying to survive. I mean, I was really fortunate that year. I had a couple senior center backs in front of me that were, both probably 5'9", 5'10", and good, solid, leadership type players. And so, they were extraordinarily helpful in terms of kind of trying to maneuver through that season. That season was like an amazing run, right? You walk into college, and the next thing you know, you're ending up in a Final Four, and the path to that Final Four. Back in the day, you didn't have conferences, so people would get together and they would decide, are we going to let this team into the tournament? And when you're coming from the Midwest, you had to travel a lot, so we had to go really beat teams consistently on both coasts in order to even be considered for the tournament. And I think Greg did a really good job of recognizing, hey, we have to play these teams in order to get our shot. And so we were able to, and I think that tournament run was a little blizzard snowstorm in Madison, which, is certainly, takes the tables and evens them a little bit. And then the second game, we went out to Massachusetts and played UMass, which is, the April Heinrichs kind of time frame. And they were like great. And literally second half, like we luckily got like a 1-0 lead. And then the second half, I mean, we're getting pounded, but the second half, there's a torrential rainstorm. And we, kind of battle through, balls just bouncing everywhere. It was just mass mayhem. And we win 1-0. I'm pretty sure it was 1-0. And then, you find yourself in the semis against, North Carolina during the time when they were on an absolute dominating tear, right? And that particular game, and I think what got people's attention, was that we were 0-0 at 75 minutes in that game, which was pretty awesome. I mean, and they were like you could feel the anxiety and the pressure and everything starting to build. And then we conceded a goal. And then once that happened, and don't get me wrong, we weren't playing a freestyle. We knew what we were up against. We were playing a 5-4-1 for God's sakes. We called it the egg because Greg was like trying to tell us what it was. So we jokingly called it the egg because it felt like you were all heavy at the bottom and pretty light at the top. And, but once you get behind one, I mean, you're in the semifinals of the national championship, you're going to open it up and try to go score. And then we conceded a couple more. But, that was the first time that I think I really felt like legitimized in my goalkeeping. Like I wasn't highly recruited. I was out of Omaha. I was lucky to get into college. I was lucky to get a scholarship and to have those opportunities that I had. And like I told you before, I felt like even that opportunity came with just that little bit of just the right amount of luck at the right time. Right. And then to, be standing, year and a half, 2 years later, in a semifinal game against North Carolina at North Carolina and playing well, was really, kind of an awesome kind of experience and really legitimized kind of what I was doing.
Yeah. When you say legitimized, do you mean from like you understanding yourself or for like, hey, I'm kind of now getting the credit that I already kind of knew I had?
Yeah. I mean, I think both. Like, you don't know where you stack up against everybody else until you go stack yourself up, right? And then, so me understanding, okay, yeah, this is real. I can do this. And then also having people, for the first time, because, I'd been in the ODP and to some national camps and some other things. Like the next year, after we went to Marquette, we were in Colorado at their training center. And, but I'm just like on the fringe, and you just feel like, okay, am I ever going to get like the big shot? Because when you're at that stage, what you also have to understand is like, when we're as athletes, we weren't necessarily dreaming of World Cups, right? Because there wasn't a World Cup, right? Yeah. I mean, we were dreaming of Olympics, right? Yeah. And so U.S. soccer also was a little bit associated with the U.S. The U.S. Olympic group, and so that's where a lot of our training was. And so you're in your mind thinking like, my dream is I want to play in Olympics, right? That was kind of that kind of thought process back then. And always feeling like, okay, well, it's not even in the Olympics yet. It wasn't even in the Olympics yet. Right. And so I'm in a sport that's not even going to have that chance. And I'm just on the fringe of the national team feeling like, I'm probably not going to get a chance, Yeah. But so it was the first time I felt like, okay, I could actually have a chance at this.
Yeah. Yeah. Did those challenges that you faced, whether it was the weather, whether it was playing against a top team, whether it was the lack of publicity, how did that affect you and your team? Because it seems like it helped. You mentioned kind of evening the tables, but it seems like it actually kind of helped y'all a bit of, hey, it's tough. Like it seems like y'all kind of get the edge, or you kind of get the edge a little bit. Oh, yeah. How did the team respond to, hey, rain's hitting in second half, or we're having a snowstorm? Oh, yeah. How did that impact the team?
Yeah, I mean, we were a bunch of kind of hard-nosed, Midwestern people. So, if it's, 30 degrees and snowing one day and, piercing rain the next. You're just kind of like, okay, just go play. And
Yeah.
you know, I had some defenders that didn't mind getting down and dirty. You know, they loved slide tackling. So you get them on the wet pitch, they were always pretty happy about that. So it was, you know, I think we had a lot of like really hard-nosed, you know, kind of Midwestern people that you know loved those sorts of challenges for sure.
Yeah, I can see that. To pivot just a little bit before I want to, obviously the 91 run is a big year for you and your team, but on the world stage, it was the first time we have a World Cup. I'm just curious from your understanding of, or did you understand at all that the World Cup was happening that first year?
Yeah. So just because we were in the, you know, again, like on the fringe of, you know, in these national camps leading up to it, we knew that this big tournament was coming. As you probably know, they didn't call it a World Cup back then. It was called retroactively they called that the first Women's World Cup, but it was, you know, you know, it was a World Championship M&M's Cup or M&M's Mars Cup or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So of course we all knew about it because at the time, Mia Hamm opted out of that season of college soccer to just go train. And then Christine Lilly didn't. She played this season, I believe, but then took off to go to the World Cup. And then, you know, there were others that were kind of out of college soccer to be gone and training. And then, of course, like the weekend of the NCAA Final Four, I mean, they were playing games in China. And so Anson was not at that game, that Final Four game in 91. He was in China, and Bill Palladino was coaching for him. So it was, you know, so we're all like, you know, aware that, you know, there's a different vibe. They're missing some of their better players. So, you know, you're thinking to yourself, okay, maybe we got a chance, right? And then also from afar, their interest in that game, because this was their a lot of those players' college team, you know, playing for a national championship again. So, I mean, I think there was interest actually going both ways from them in China and us in the United States.
That's interesting. I remember listening to a podcast, Grant Wall had done it, and about the 91 World Cup, but I guess I hadn't thought about the timelines because that totally makes sense of how kind of interconnected those tournaments are. That's really
yeah, it was. They were in China when we were playing that championship.
Yeah. Well, going into those final years there at Wisconsin, I guess I'm also curious on, and some of this is just kind of for my own personal curiosity, but when it comes to the transfer portal, I assume you had no. I mean, I don't know if you did or didn't, but I guess I'm just curious of mobility because again, right now, 2025, it's a big deal. You know, like people are announcing they're just entering the portal. So I guess I'm curious on what that was like time from players.
I mean, I think mobility was a lot harder just from the things we've talked about. Like there's no cell phones, like someone's calling your like home line or your college line, or you know, there's not internet really yet, and social media and all those other things. So there wasn't a lot. I think I can remember maybe one player coming from like a school in Florida at one point in time to come play for us. And that's the only one that I'm like clearly like remember as being a transfer in my entire years of college.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, that's a different time. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, talk about the kind of the lead up to the final, because I assume when you think of like rivalries, sometimes it's kind of geographically based, and you know you play this team over and over and over. But sometimes it's kind of like, hey, that team's got a target on their back, and it kind of feels like UNC's maybe more of that latter for y'all. Where I mean, maybe for everyone as well.
Yeah.
But of wanting to get some revenge on them, and you know, with the World Cup kind of also paralleling at the time. Tell me about that run up of okay, hey, we actually, you know, that feeling of hey, we may actually have a chance this year.
Yeah. So I would say regionally, our kind of rival was probably Colorado College at the time, because our two head coaches were like longtime friends, and again, there was only a couple playing, really competitively. Like I said, Michigan State, some of the Ohio's, but really out of the central region, it was, for a long time, Colorado College was the team that would get into the NCAA tournament. And then it started to be Colorado College and Wisconsin getting into the NCAA tournament. And so I would say they were, without a doubt, our kind of regional rival. I think we played them most every year I was in college. We would travel and play them somewhere. And then, from a UNC standpoint, I mean, I think, unfortunately, fortunately for them, they were fairly unrivaled at that time. They were mowing through everybody for the most part during those years around when I was in college. But of course, they are the team that has the target on their back, because they were just exceptional and so good at the time, and only really getting better. He was already great, and in comes Christine Lilly and Mia Hamm and others.
Yeah, interesting. I think 90 Colorado College knocks y'all out, and then 91 y'all end up making all the way to the final.
Yeah, we play Colorado. We played Colorado College in the semis that year.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. That's
so it was a 1-0 game against CC in the semis that got us to the final. So yeah, it was that year was a lot, because I mean, I don't know if you look back, but I want to say we had like 11 1-0 games that year.
Oh, wow.
And back in the day, you only played about 19 games. Yeah. And so, we were living like it was a stressful season, 11 1-0 wins was clean living for sure.
Yeah. It's funny seeing, because I was going through some of the record books, and of course your name is just littered throughout Wisconsin's records. But of course a lot of those are kind of centered on like saves of like, hey, you saw a lot of shots, made a lot of saves, which is really funny to me, because you're like 15 up on shutouts. So it's like you're getting shelled a lot, you're making a lot of saves, but you are able to have a lot of these kind of 1-0 shutout wins.
Yeah.
And so
actually we I don't know that we're 15, we're probably like 2 or 3. My team, like, we had 52 shutouts in 76 games. Wow. And we held that NCAA D1 record for about 25 years, until I think UCLA and Caitlin Rowland broke it. But yeah, we had like 52 in 76 games.
Yeah,
it's pretty incredible. Like, it was. It was. We did not like to give up goals, and we didn't play the most exciting style of soccer, to say, but we also played to our strengths. You have to play smart. So we bided our time and played good defense, and then when we had chances to strike, we went forward as a team. But
I saw some. I don't have a clip, but I saw some clipping of someone criticizing how y'all kind of sat in against UNC in your freshman year, but then even Anson himself was like, well, like, that's kind of the best way. Like, they're playing to their strengths. Like, that's how they should probably play to beat us. Like, someone was criticizing y'all, didn't even answer. Was like, no, it makes sense. And
we were 0-0 at 75 minutes, and I think they beat somebody like 6-0 that tournament, like something like crazy, So we clearly were not, taking a ton. That was my freshman year. My senior year, it was a little bit more even of a game. We had some chances going forward. We had some really unfortunate goals. Just people trying to do that little extra when you're playing against, Carolina. But no, there's without a doubt, like, we're undermanned. We know this, right? You've got to know what your strengths are, and you play to your strengths. And I wouldn't say we were completely packed in, because we went forward when we had a chance. But for the most part, we're just going to withstand and play smart, smart team defensive soccer, and then kind of take our chances when we can.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I guess I'm curious on that transitional time. So you have a very, very successful college run, and 91, you ended up on a very, very high note as well. And so when I was looking through you know, other goalkeepers have kind of matched a bit of what you've done. You know, a lot of them are getting looks at the national team, and finding a couple of things. I found one that I just got a good laugh on, but on the bottom left there, you're kind of talking about, you know, moving on from college and mentioning that if it happens, I really think it's time to go on. There's more to life than athletics, especially for women. I think we realize that sooner than men, which kind of hard to argue. But you know, kind of walk me through a bit of that time where.
So don't get me wrong. Like, you know, I'm waiting for that call for 3 years to go to a national camp, right? You know, but at that point in time, you know, Anson's training for that first World Cup. So I want to think it was like Mary Harvey and maybe Amy Ullman. Like, he had them like solidified, and they were quite a bit older. They were probably, you know, 4 or 5 years older than me in terms of, you know, and again, you know, you finish at 21, you know, I was 21 years of age. We finish in a national championship game, lose a national championship game, and, you know, you're done. And, you know, you want to like replay the game, like right that minute, right? You know, for the rest of your life. But you can't. But you're also like the best you are. Like, soccer players at 21 are just hitting stride, you know? So I'm thinking like, I'm the best I've ever been. I'm on top of, you know, I accomplished a lot. I'm physically in great condition. I'm like, you know, playing, you know, at the top of my game. And then the World Cup ends. And I don't know if you know much about that time, but then nothing happened. So the U.S. Soccer put all their money into the men because the World Cup in '94 was happening, right? So that's like 2 short years later, right? So they actually, it ended. They came back in, I think, November, and like nothing happens. You don't hear anything for, you know, I graduate college, it's summer, and then literally it's end of July, like about the last week of July. And again, same thing. My home phone, you know, landline phone rings, and my parents answer it, and it's Tony DeChico. He was coaching goalkeepers at the time for the national team, and says, I want you to come into national camp. We're going to be doing it in Boston in mid-August, and I want to give you a chance. And I am literally starting medical school the next week. So I say, okay, listen, I gotta talk to my med school, right? So I make an appointment with my dean. I go in, I meet with the dean of the medical school, and I ask, you know, 2 things. Like, A, can that, you know, week and a half be an excused absence? And the answer was no. And then, can I defer for a year? So then saying, okay, I'm going to take a year and I'm going to like see where this gets me. And then, and the answer again was no, because it was so late in the season, right? And, you know, nowadays, I mean, if a female athlete who they'd admitted into a medical school walked into a dean's office at a medical school nowadays and said, listen, I have a chance to go train and potentially be on our U.S. women's national soccer team, the answer would overwhelmingly be yes, right? We can defer you, we can do whatever. But back then, I mean, nobody even knew we had a U.S. women's national soccer team, right? And so I went in, so then I was faced with I had really then 2 choices at that point in time, right? One, I go to medical school. The other, that I, you know, kind of try to lop on as a grad assistant somewhere around the country, again, with season starting in 2 weeks, the college season starting in 2 weeks, and try to play and train and see if I can make anything happen. And in the end, I decided, you know, it's probably medical school then at that point in time. And again, at that time, FIFA hadn't even announced that there was going to be another, like, quote, Women's World Cup, right? And, you know, U.S. Soccer just like nothing happened. They played 2 games in all of '92, and it was like those 2 mid-August games in Boston. That was it. That was the only training they did that whole entire year. So from November of 92 or November of 91, all the way until March of 93, there were 2 games played. And so, faced with what was going on, and actually it hadn't been admitted to the 96 Olympics yet either. The 96 Olympics, they added it like 2 years before that, and they didn't add it. Usually you go through exhibition and then like an actual, like, full sport. They went straight to a sport, and they did it like 2 years before the Olympics in Atlanta. So at the time, it's not in the Olympics. There's not another World Cup, and U.S. soccer hasn't held anything. And every summer so far they've held something, and they've held nothing. And so that was kind of that one defining moment where I got my chance, and I actually said no, which is still crazy to me. But
well, you're probably in a pretty small pool of people who said no to the national team. But I hear a lot from college players who finished playing, and even now today, where there's this kind of like loss of identity of, man, I've committed all this time from age 5 to now, and they're moving on for whatever reason. I guess I'm curious on your end, how did you handle being such a strong competitor and going to such highs, and then getting kind of a half chance at the end that you're saying no to? How was those kind of months, years afterwards, where you're kind of understanding, like, hey, I'm transitioning to this next stage of life?
Yeah, I mean, once you get into medical school, the amount of material and everything is like, drinking water out of a fire hose. So very quickly you sort of immerse yourself into that world, or you die. It's rough. It's a lot of information in a very short amount of time. So the transition into medicine was, a necessary one, where you don't have a whole lot of time to think much about, anything else. Probably the one time that I felt really, really wistful about it was when they announced that it was going to be in the 96 Olympics in Atlanta. Because that had been like my childhood dream, was the Olympics. And so when they announced it, and, really, the goalkeepers that were invited in that summer, like Bree Scurry, and I think,
like, did Noonan and Saskia? I'm trying to think who all would have gone into that.
Saskia Weber. It was Saskia Weber. So it was, and I'm not sure so it was me, and then they end up only having, I think, like 3 in. But 2 of those goalkeepers that went into that camp in August of 92 were then on our national team for that first Olympics. And that was probably the first time that I felt a little like wistful about it, honestly, in terms of like, oh man, what did I do? But at the same time, you're at that stage. I'm graduating from medical school and moving on to residency, and that's obviously a big day and a big accomplishment as well. So
well, I found a couple videos of you just talking about work, and I can't help but notice the thread that when I read the newspaper clippings of you getting all these accolades, you would always pivot to, well, actually, my defense as a whole, and you're always very, very forthcoming of recognizing the collective there. But even you talking about work now, of the little I found, you had kind of a very similar mindset. So I guess I'm curious of what was like the thread that runs through goalkeeping for you that also kind of now extends in life. Like, it seems like one didn't just totally end. Like, there is kind of an echo in some sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think, clearly, like you say, as a goalkeeper, like, shutout records and shutouts and all of those things, like, aren't accomplished by one person. At Wisconsin, we were playing very, committed team defense, right? And so that is clearly an accomplishment of all of us and all my teammates, and not just my defenders, but everybody who really committed to playing defense. And so when you go into, the medical field and caring for patients, I mean, I think there's also I've taken the same approach in terms of my office and, creating really strong teams of people, whether, it be, my, MA or the nurses or my partners, that we take a very team-based approach to what we do. And, everybody works and is trusted to do, their job and to the best of their ability, and getting everybody working at the highest level possible. I think you take all of those things from sports into the working world. And then, I'm an OBGYN. And so, from the standpoint of how that sort of probably, marries into my previous life, goalkeeping is a lot of like, standing around doing nothing, and then all of a sudden all hell breaks loose, right? Well, obstetrics is a little bit like that in a lot of ways, that most of the time everything's smooth sailing, but when the crazy things happen, you have to have somebody who, can respond under pressure and, get the job done, and, save a life or two. And so, I think from that standpoint, I think I very much chose probably what I went into because of those like parts of me that needed that sort of adrenaline and those like, acute challenges that I faced growing up in sports that, I now face on a regular basis and as an OBGYN and delivering babies and other things.
Yeah. I had not thought, the team aspect I can definitely see and kind of visualize, but I had not thought of the aspect of like sitting around waiting, and it's sometimes probably not even waiting. You're just in a moment like, oh, okay. And then something happens. I hadn't thought about that, but that would definitely translate very, very well. Well, I have a couple more questions. I think this will kind of wrap up well for us. One's kind of a two-parter, so I guess 3 questions here. But what is a standout memory for you? And this is the 2-parter. One, give me one on the field where you're like, man, I'm never going to forget that on the field moment. And then give me one either off the field or, outside the game or hovering around the game or with players, teammates, whatever. But give me one memory from both of those on off field that you're like, I'll never forget this.
Yeah. So, I think that that very first Final Four, 0-0 with North Carolina was like enormous. That was it was a great game. It was a back and forth. We were getting pounded, but it was just like so much fun. Just, hitting that sort of pinnacle so early, and I think was like really awesome. And then doing it again later on was pretty awesome. And what's great about my teammates in Wisconsin, there's still a couple gals who live in the Madison area, and so we go back every year, get together. Basically, it's like one massive like sleepover at one lady's house, and go to a football game, and hit all the typical bars, and it's awesome. So I had really, really pretty amazing teammates that were that still are friends today, and I think we've all been tied back to Wisconsin, by our collective experience in sports, and then also, by our success. It was a great time.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. Yeah. I can't count how many times I've talked to players from, the 20th century that all had very insular moments of, they didn't have internet, the publicity, but the continual relationships of, hey, like we were there, and that was for us, that just brings it out. So very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, last question here. I think this will put a nice kind of cap on it. And feel free to take this in literally in any direction. It's kind of intentionally a little ambiguous, but what does goalkeeping mean to you?
Gosh. I think, goalkeeping / athletics are part of like the fabric of how I'm made, right? I really feel like when I think of who I am and kind of my life-shaping moments. Many of them are intertwined with sport. And I take a lot of those, I think what I probably always say is that some of my best attributes probably come from sports, and some of my worst attributes probably come from sports. I'm more intense and intimidating than I probably want to be, but yet I'm the way that I always take a team approach and always have the person next to me's back, and that sort of becomes really ingrained into who you are as a person. And so I think probably that for me is what goalkeeping and then sports meant to me.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Taggart. I like I said, I find this time really fascinating, and there's all these little pockets of high achievements and high moments that I love kind of uncovering. And I had done a little bit of research, but some of the stuff you're telling me, I didn't know about that as well. And the research I had done had also led me to think that you're a photographer, which there's Taggart around out there taking
no photographer, but no, I mean, I think really this was a front seat, or at least maybe a back seat to the start of women's soccer in the United States. Without a doubt, me, my teammates, we were all there, and we started what a lot of people now get to experience, which is amazing. I always joke, like, back in the day, we bought our own warm-ups, and I got like one pair of gloves for the season, but I actually brought my own goalie shirt the first year. And then like my second year we had a goalie shirt. So it was the really early stages. The financial support was, I think the coaches back then had to be really creative with how they, did it. We did a lot of, breakfast and lunch. They would go grocery shopping, and we'd have it all piled into one room, and we'd eat breakfast and lunch out of there. And then we'd have one dinner, and trying to figure out ways to, because, we had to travel. If we were going to get in the NCAA tournament, we had to go to the East Coast, we had to go to the West Coast, and we probably had to beat or play well against Colorado College if we wanted to get in the tournament. And so I think, Greg and Dino did a great job of really trying to maneuver the dollars to get us where we needed to be. And it was interesting times, compared to now. I've got a daughter playing D2 soccer, and she's a senior this year. And, she'll send me pictures of their, like all the gear they get and everything. And I'm always like, yeah, that's awesome.
I'm happy for you. Yeah.
Yes. I think Grandma and Grandpa bought my warm-up jacket that one year, but anyway.
Yeah, the pioneering, I think a lot of people just kind of boil it down to like, oh, you're first. Wow, it's like, no, like really pioneering in the sense, like you had to kind of go carve out your own path and figure it out. There wasn't a lot of blueprint.
Well, and that's, I mean, I would want to say that about our very first, like our very first national team when they went. A lot of those women gave up because a good chunk of them were out of college by then, and they were literally like quitting jobs and taking really incredible chances to build soccer in the United States. They weren't getting paid. They were leaving jobs. They were working jobs that weren't going to be their final job of their career, just so that they could keep playing. And kudos to them, because that went on for really probably through 99, where they were really making enormous sacrifices to push forward and to continue to play soccer. And like I said, when it came time for me to decide, do I take that chance or do I go to medical school? My choice was medical school. But there were a lot of women that made up our first two national teams that made incredible sacrifices to play and to build our sport. So kudos to them.
Yeah. No, I think this era is just one that sacrifice is a perfect word for it, because the fame and the money that came from it, like, happened at one point, but it really, those first good chunk of those years, like, it took a long time to come out.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Taggart. Very, very enjoyable. I love hearing about this time. So I'll go ahead and close. I think about.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill. It was great. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Let me hit in recording here 1 second.